24, 25, October, 1944, Formosa Strait. In barely 9 months at sea, USS Tang, under Lieutenant Commander Richard H. O'Kane has ripped through convoy after convoy. Wartime tallies will later credit 33 ships, while post-war JANAC audits will stand at 24, but tonight the book is still being written. The black hull runs the surface in a low swell. Ahead, a fat convoy of transports and tankers pushes north under Kaibokan escorts. A senior officer barking bearings across a bridge, crowded with binoculars. Tang's SJ set paints clean blips. Numbers pass in clipped cadence. Throttles hold. Tubes stand ready. He picks the center. Stand by 1 through 4. The helmsman keeps her parallel to the columns as the TDC ticks. O'Kane calls the spread, and the boat exhales steel. Seconds drag. Then the night jumps. One ship lifts in a white cone. Another folds at midships, steam and flame rolling down her decks. Sirens rip the dark. Searchlights rake the water. Tracer shears low over Tang's wake. The senior escort officer orders a turn-in charges, set ramming on the table. O'Kane stays up threads, the gap reloads at a crawl. Open outer doors. He takes the far column, a tanker stacked with deck cargo. 2 fish walk into her, and the hull hinges crates arcing into the glow. An escort lunges to ram. Tang slides past the bow wave by inches engines, answering for maximum turns, while the bridge counts the beat between water hills from the first depth charge pattern. The convoy breaks, whistles blare, formation discipline collapses. O'Kane wheels for stragglers, husbanding what remains. Another shot, another hit, bright metal tearing open at a freighter's stern. Screws stop, she staggers and goes still. Escorts, close propellers, thrumming hydrophones, singing. More charges roll the sea, rising and falling, but the American boat is already edging out to reset. 1 torpedo remains. O'Kane wants the last ship still moving. Tang steadies, fires heels away to clear. The wake runs true under the target, then curves. A sick, impossible arc tightens back toward Tang's stern. Back emergency. The order is still in the air when the quarter blooms white, a Mark 18's circular run slamming home. Steel tears. Lights die. Men gasp in the black. The escorts lose way and drift on the blast searchlights, clawing at oil and wreckage. The Strait goes quiet, and the ledger closes. 22. January 1944. The Pacific Submarine Force had already been shifting from cautious stalks to deliberate aggression. By early 1944, the guidance from Subpac was blunt. Find the enemy strike at night on the surface, and let radar reveal what the Japanese thought was invisible. USS Tang, a Balao class, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Richard H. O'Kane, operated inside that doctrine. Across the window, from late January into October 1944, when Tang would earn wartime tallies later, reconciled as 33 ships in contemporary totals and 24 in JANAC's post-war audit. The boat's patrols ran the coastal arteries from the China coast down through the Formosa Strait toward the Philippine sea lanes. Those arteries fed fuel, munitions, and replacement parts to embattled island garrisons, cut them, and Tokyo's reinforcement timetable frayed. Throughout 1944, the submarine war migrated from solitary hunts to convoy interdiction. Japanese logistics hid behind escort screens and night navigation, relying on Kaibokan, and converted escorts to shepherd tankers and transports through choke points like the Formosa Strait. The American answer was the surface night attack radar-guided approaches that erased the old daylight gunnery advantage. Tang carried the tools for that trade, an SJ surface search radar, a Mark III torpedo data computer that solved firing solutions in seconds, 6 bow tubes and 4 stern tubes, and a mixed load of torpedoes that by mid-1944 included Mark 18 electrics alongside remaining Mark 14 steam rounds. The electric fish left no bright wake. Their propulsion also introduced unfamiliar failure modes crews had to respect. The stakes were immediate and concrete. From October 1944, the Leyte campaign turned every northbound shipment from Formosa or the China coast into a potential pivot for the defense of the Philippines. One successful night of interdiction could strand aviation fuel, aircraft spares, and ammunition short of the airfields and depots that needed them most. For the Americans, slicing those corridors reduced the enemy's ability to contest landings or reform a coherent shield. For the Japanese, a lost convoy meant not only material loss, but the exposure of escort doctrine and the morale shock of seeing merchant tonnage vanish under the black. Operationally, Tang and boats like her refined a choreography close at slow speed on the surface to minimize wake. Use SJ to map the convoy and its screen, select a column, and when geometry allowed, run parallel inside the escorts. Surface night attacks traded the risks of light for a stable firing platform and immediate visual confirmation of damage. Timing and discipline were absolute. The TDC and the captain's judgment had to be spotless. Reloading on the surface between runs shortened the interval to the next salvo at the cost of exposure if escorts closed quickly. Japanese escorts adapted in turn. Kaibokan employed active sonar quick pattern depth charges and hard turns to fragment contacts. Doctrine emphasized close escort and a readiness to ram when sea state permitted. In the close night, melee searchlights smoke-crossing wakes, coordination could fail. Once columns were punctured, whistles and emergency maneuvers unraveled formation discipline, forcing escorts into reactive patterns that left exploitable gaps. Technology was decisive but not deterministic. Radar and the TDC compressed decisions. Mark 18 torpedoes denied lookouts the telltale trail. New hardware, however, carried new hazards. Circular run torpedoes, born of steering or gyroscope failure, were a known nightmare in briefings. Commanders balanced the tactical gain of an invisible shot against the ominous chance that a wayward fish might come home. Through the spring and summer of 1944, Tang's patrols read as brutal efficiencies. Night after night, she picked tankers heavy with fuel and transports stacked with crates, exploiting narrow channels where screens compressed. Each sinking compounded pressure on Tokyo's logistic map. Each lost hull increased the odds that next month's spares and fuel would not arrive. From the Japanese side, reports accumulated into a pattern: an American submarine that struck fast, often on the surface, then slipped clear before countermeasures bit. Command decisions on both sides reflected that pattern. American directives emphasized boldness, while radar granted sight. Japanese ASW revised spacing and patrol patterns, but industry and fuel limits capped how many quality escorts could ride every convoy. What Tang and her contemporaries exploited was not a single trick, but a systemic gap: too many ships to guard, too few effective screens to guard them. By late October, with later burning and convoy timetables more predictable, Tang's actions became the culminating application of months of doctrine and technology. The very traits that let her cut convoys so efficiently: the confidence in surface night approaches, the reliance on radar. The use of electric torpedoes also carried a double edge: a single torpedo malfunction or a perfectly timed escort. Reaction could invert the fight in an instant, turning hunter into wreckage within the same black water. 2325, October 1944, Formosa Strait on Tang's Bridge. The night was a calculus of instruments and small movements. Lieutenant Commander Richard H. O'Kane worked that calculus with deliberate economy eyes, splitting time between the dark water and the SJ surface search radar. The PPI painted columns of blips where lookouts saw only black mass. Bearings, ranges, and times flowed in clipped cadence. Valves trimmed outer doors checked gyro angles set on the Mark III torpedo data computer. When O'Kane ordered a spread, it landed as procedure, not bravado. They fired because that was the work. They reloaded because that was the next work. Below decks, the torpedo room ran a choreographed violence of winches and clamps. Tang carried 6 bow tubes and 4 stern tubes, a Balau-class layout that let O'Kane punch into a column wheel clear and finish stragglers astern. The loading party timed breaths to the roll. Seconds mattered more than fear. At the helm, parallel to the convoy's track, a few degrees meant multiple wakes on the target. In the control room, the TDC man listened for the faint click of the firing solenoid and watched the brief muzzle flash register on the repeater. Hits were entered, not cheered. Across 1,000, 944. The edge was a system, not a trick. SJ provided the picture. The TDC compressed geometry into solutions. Doctrine said, surface at night, slide inside the screen, fire short salvos at column leaders, reload on the surface and hit again. Surface attacks traded the risk of light for a stable platform and immediate visual confirmation. The price was exposure, if a Kaibokan guessed right, and closed fast. Japanese escorts adapted in kind. Kaibokan used active sonar quick-pattern depth charges and hard turn-ins to fragment contacts. In the stutter of searchlights and smoke, coordination could collapse. Once a column was punctured, whistles, collision alarms and emergency turns unraveled spacing, leaving gaps Tang could walk through. On their bridges, officers measured the sea as geometry. To be repaired bearings, barked searchlights, ordered charges, rolled rams considered, while engineering plants hummed and hydrophones hunted for a cough of propeller. The weapon mix cut both ways. By mid-1944, Mark 18, electric torpedoes rode in the racks beside remaining Mark 14 steamfish. The electrics left no bright wake to betray a solution. Their new propulsion and steering introduced failure modes, the briefers underlined at Pearl. The nightmare had a plain name, circular, runner steering or gyro fault that bent the track back toward the shooter. The warning was simple: invisible shots are unforgiving if they lose their minds. Hits and counter-hits, wrote the ledger. Explosions through white cones and steam pillars. Escorts closed. Depth charge patterns beat the hull and rattled glass. Tang edged out to reset and came back in when geometry allowed. Men counted intervals between water hills, watched needles and clocks, and treated survival as a chain of small decisions executed without pause. On the other side of the fire, merchant crews felt the night as rupture plates letting go fuel in the air. Cargo made irrelevant by flame, while escort captains judged success through oil and wreckage and failure through absence. By the end of October, the pattern had hardened. Radar picture inside, run short salvos, rapid surface reloads a turn for stragglers, escorts answering with sonar charges and hard rams whenever chance and sea state aligned. Technology compressed the kill chain. It never removed the cost. 24, 25, October 1944. Formosa Strait spray streaked the bridge, combing as Lieutenant Commander Richard H. O'Kane leaned into the wind and watched the SJ surface search radar scope bloom 3 columns, steady speed Kaibokan tight on the flanks. Bearings came soft and exact range angle speed. Below the Mark III, TDC hummed. A finger rose. Outer doors opened. Gyro angles ticked across headsets. The firing key clicked. Seconds thinned. Then orange and white lifted the horizon, a tanker torn open at midships. No cheer. Only new bearings, searchlights, carving silver through spray tracers, whispering low across the waves. In the forward room, work was muscle and rhythm. The chief torpedo man ran the ritual on a Mark 18, batteries charged, contact exploder, armed gyro set, door cycle checked. Steel slid on rails, clamps snapped home. Flood 1 through 4. The hull flexed as a fish left its cradle. No one shouted. They moved faster. Oil, sweat, and cold metal salted the air. Every motion carried the same quiet knowledge. One mistake could erase them all. Aboard a Kaibokan, an escort officer squinted into his own cone of light and barked a bearing that felt wrong even as he gave it. He had drilled for periscopes in daylight, not a predator running the surface at night. The sonar man called a faint propeller, cough that danced off the bow and vanished. Turn-in ordered, pattern shallow, guns ready. The first blasts were theirs. The next came from the convoy itself, a transport blooming into flame. Fire lit low cloud and outlined every mistake. The small ship drove hard across the suspected track and found only empty water. Tang ran parallel to the outer column as if tied to it with string. O'Kane's voice flattened into geometry. Course steady, range closing. Stand by 5 and 6. A fraction on the helm. The boat obeyed. 2 more electric fish slipped away, no bright wakes to betray them. Impact came as a dull metallic cough under the sea. Target lights died. In the control room, the TDC operator logged time and shifted to the next problem. Above spray stoned the fair water. Tang stayed up because doctrine demanded its speed sight and quicker reload than the escorts could manage. In the engine room, the grammar was verbs, make turns, more turns, all ahead. Diesels bellowed and fell to a hush on order. Heat pressed into backs, needles trembled near red. A messenger threaded the catwalk with a chalk note, 1 electric forward fish remaining. The engineer nodded once. His tools were his votes. He kept the line between daring and death with wrenches and fuel. On a burning freighter, a boatswain fought a jammed davit. The deck canted. Diesel fumes burned eyes. Cargo kindled like brush. A cook lurched past, clutching a first aid box, and vanished in smoke. A whistle blew somewhere unheard. When the hull folded amidships, it groaned like an animal. Men who paused a heartbeat too long met the sea head first. The Kaibokan's sonar caught a hard contact and lost it in the clutter of collapsing ships. The escort captain gripped the rail until his palms burned and ordered a cross-pattern drop. Depth charges rolled. Water hills shouldered up and fell. For a moment he believed they had trapped the intruder. Oil sheen bubbles a shadow like a scar. Then the shadow resolved into planks and crates, the fuel of the merchant they had failed to save. Rescue nets over the side. Curses for the black water that kept its secrets. Toward midnight, Tang was exhausted but sharp. Voices rasped, hands blistered. O'Kane weighed the last torpedo-like coin and spent it on a freighter that refused to die. Open outer door. The boat leveled and committed. The plot line ran straight until it curved. A tremor in the operator's hand became a line bending inward. No one spoke, breath cinched. The torpedo's track looped back. Back emergency. Orders cracked through steel. Levers slammed. Engines reversed. The hull shook. The chief torpedo man stared at a panel that could not see what hunted them now. Men braced without speech. Outside, unseen but certain, the Mark 18 completed its circular run. White hammered the quarter. Steel tore. The world went dark. Searchlights later combed an oil field, stippled with wreckage and heads. Lines went over. Sailors hauled enemies from the water. In a wardroom that smelled of tea and bilge, dripping men sat beneath a single bulb. Questions came: why surface at night? What radar? What range? How many torpedoes? Answers broke into fragments of pride and shock. Notes became instructions: crowd the screen at choke points. Turn faster on first contact ram when the silhouette appears. Out on the swell, a petty officer clung to a raft and tried not to think. He remembered the silence between salvos, the way a crew moved like one organism, the illusion that skill could outrun chance. The sea had its own arithmetic procedure, luck, consequence. The same instrument that gave them power to kill had closed its circle and claimed them. Wartime tallies credited USS Tang with 33 ships across her 1,944 patrols. The Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee, built from Allied logs and captured Japanese records, reconciled that figure to 24 ships at approximately 93800 tons. Modern compilations that reread convoy reports and loss lists often restore a 33 ships and approximately 116,000 tons picture. The editorial answer is not to pick a side, but to state the ledger, as it is 33 in wartime and modern counts 24 in the post-war assessment, and then ask what those numbers meant in the water. They meant that the losses were the right kind of losses. Tang's shooting tended toward tankers and loaded transports, the cargo that multiplies time, aviation fuel that never reaches an airfield, aircraft spares that do not convert into sorties, ammunition that does not appear at a beachhead. In the Formosa Strait, the geography favored that outcome. Islands and capes compressed formations into predictable tracks. Escorts had to cling tightly to columns. The surface search radar gave a submarine simultaneous options, and the Mark III torpedo data computer turned those options into short parallel salvos that fractured discipline. A night's work looked like tonnage on paper. In the Philippines, it looked like fewer ready aircraft, slower repairs, and thin magazines at the wrong end of a supply line. The asymmetry behind those nights was industrial as much as tactical. Balao-class hulls could be kept on station because the United States sustained a forward pipeline of radar sets, torpedo data computer parts, torpedo loads, and yard periods that returned the same boats to the same waters. Production of Mark 18 electric torpedoes aligned with the surface night method, even as ordnance shops worked through reliability bulletins. Japan faced the opposite curve. A tanker shortage deepening since late 1943, training cycles shortened by urgency, thin spares for sonar and gunnery, and too few small escorts with effective radar to erase the submarine's night. Advantage. Even well-handled kaibokan could not fully protect convoys in narrow water when a radar-guided attacker could reload on the surface and re-attack before order reformed. Doctrine turned that asymmetry into repeatable results. Under Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood, the submarine force of the Pacific Fleet set rules that were brutally simple, close fast on the surface, hit column leaders and tankers, stay up if the screen was still sorting itself out and strike again, before the pattern returned. Risk was not hidden. Gunfire, ramming, and shallow pattern depth charges were the price of speed and sight. Crews were trained to pay that price in rational coins, timing, geometry discipline, and to hedge the one hazard that could not be outdriven, the small but real chance of a Mark 18 circular run. Briefings taught the counterwatch, the bearing rate order back emergency, throw the rudder hard, and acknowledged that sometimes the weapon that made the attack invisible would also be the mechanism of failure. Scorecards capture the visible edge. Convoy behavior records the systemic one. After hard nights, the Japanese tightened screens at choke points, turned quicker on first contact, and treated ramming as instinct at a surface silhouette. Each adaptation carried costs: tighter screens, magnified confusion. When a column was punctured faster, turns raised collision risk, in spray and glare, and ramming in crowded water risked the very ships being protected. Outcomes varied with weather, crew skill, and equipment condition. The pattern did not. In a corridor where too many ships had to move and too few capable escorts could guard them, a single disciplined submarine could repeatedly impose loss out of proportion to its size. That is why the ledger matters more than the boast. Whether one cites 33 or 24, the consequence is the same at the edge of latte fuel, not delivered spares, not installed ammunition, not on hand. Tang's campaign is not a romance about a lone hunter. It is a case study in how doctrine, logistics, and production align with geography to manufacture opportunity, and how a final mechanical whim could still invert the outcome in a heartbeat. Night slid toward dawn with a practiced calm that had nothing to do with safety. The crew of Tang moved in their grooves, repeating the cycle that had worked across months: radar, picture, plot approach, short spread, reload on the surface, go again. The sea near the Formosa Strait pinned convoys to tight tracks, and geometry favored the hunter. Surface search radar showed the pattern, and the Mark III torpedo data computer turned the pattern into numbers a helmsman and a torpedoman could use without thinking. The escorts knew this rhythm now. They tightened screens, swung searchlights like scythes, and rolled depth charges early. Even so, the surface at night method kept giving Tang the first clean shot. Close to midnight on the 24th, the boat had already split one column and hurt another. Ammunition was thin. Discipline stayed thick. Richard H. O'Kane balanced the plot against what remained in the racks. He spent a pair to finish a cripple and used speed and darkness to punch through the searchlight cones. The control room called ranges like a metronome. The torpedo room, raw-palmed and economical, fed bronze into steel. Every man tasted salt, oil, and metal. The doctrine kept them on the surface. It bought sight and time. The last decision arrived with the same restrained cadence as the others. One torpedo left. A freighter still moving. An escort pattern busy with rescue and smoke. Bearing steady angle on the bow, favorable range closing. The captain asked the picture twice, got the same answer, and made the call that matched months of training. Outer door open, tube ready, gyro set, firing key down. The torpedo took the boat's intent with it and vanished into black water without a wake. For long seconds, nothing changed except the bookkeeping. The plotting rate should have ended under another ship. Instead, a smaller thing occurred, a tremor on the paper, a rate that did not match expectation. The line bent the wrong way, then bent more. Circular run is a clean phrase for a dirty physics. The electric drive hides it. The steering and the gyro keep it honest when they are right. When they are not, when a servo sticks, when a linkage balks, when a gyro loses its discipline, the weapon can drift into a curve that tightens into a loop. Nothing in the sea announces that fact. Men learn it first from briefings that say watch the bearing rate, and if it turns inward order, back emergency, and throw the rudder hard. O'Kane did not wait for a name. He recognized the math. Back emergency. Engines reversed. Levers slammed home. The hull shuddered as water clawed at steel going the wrong way. Right full rudder. The helmsman moved the wheel without looking up. The chief torpedo man stared at a panel that could not see what hunted them now. Valve handles spun. Pumps thumped. Men braced knees and forearms against bulkheads that had been good walls all night and now felt thin. Above the sea was as quiet as a lyre. No wake marked the weapon. No trace cut the surface for a lookout to spot and shout. In the control room, the plot showed what eyes could not. The line that should have ended under another ship grew tighter around their own position. A petty officer said nothing and felt his tongue turn to salt. The engine room fought mass and moments with iron and fuel. It was not a duel. It was a race between a flawed circle and a boat's ability to slide one hull length out of the answer. After the previous salvo, a Mark 18 torpedo from Tang entered a circular run and struck her own hull. The fatal blow came in the early hours of 25 October, 1944 local time. Impact arrived as a white punch on the quarter. Light, then none. Sound, then pressure. The stern took the hit, and the boat's order broke like a plate. Men who had spent the night manipulating seconds now lost count of them. Darkness forced hands to think. Someone grabbed for a flashlight and found water. Someone called a compartment by habit and got silence. The air went strange with smoke and hot metal. Training continued to function for a moment longer than luck. Then it did not. Escorts throttled back on the shock. Searchlights wandered over oil that fanned and thickened. Depth charges stopped because there was no sense in rolling them into survivors. Nets and lines went overside. Sailors in different uniforms leaned into different duties that looked the same. Get the living out of the water, count heads, record what can be learned. In a wardroom later, tea cut the smell of bilge and diesel, and questions took shape. Why the surface at night? What radar? What range? How many torpedoes? The answers came, broken, edged with pride or stunned flatness. They did not only struggle with the number of ships already lost, they struggled with the way Tang had cut a convoy apart in the final night before a torpedo came back to claim her a pattern beyond what their doctrine had prepared them to believe. On the American side, there would be cross-checks and debriefs, and later a ledger that matched claims against enemy records and gave the boat its due and its correction. Within the window that mattered, the cause was not a mystery. The method that made repeated night kills possible had always carried a slim fault line inside it. Electric torpedoes made surprise routine, and routine made the human mind trust its instruments even more. The bearing rate whispered the warning. Men heard it and moved. Physics answered that they had not moved far enough. The collapse was not moral. It was mechanical, compounded by proximity. Columns packed tight. Escorts and merchants and a submarine occupying the same small sea. Short arming distances. Shorter run times, a last shot taken inside the same geometry that had worked all night. The same tool that hid a track from enemy eyes hid it from friendly ones as well. The cost arrived in a single, unwitnessed curve. By sunrise, the Strait had returned to ordinary wind and water. Wreckage drifted. Prisoners shivered under blankets and stared at a language they did not speak. Far away, staff officers noted the loss and underlined the warning that had always been in the briefings. Watch the rate, beware the loop, do not spend the last weapon without a lane to run away in. The same choices that had made Tang unstoppable for months had, once the mechanism failed, made her fate inevitable. In the memory of the United States submarine force, Tang stands among the most successful boats by both ships and tonnage, 33 in wartime, and modern counts 24 in the post-war audit. Her captain, Richard H. O'Kane, became a byword for craft and nerve. Dawn after the loss produced sober work on both sides, rescue interrogation, debriefs, and then procedure. Japanese staffs tightened escort screens at choke points, drilled faster first contact turns, and formalized ramming as an instinct when a silhouette appeared. American commands moved the circular run warning higher in the briefings. pressed crews to guard an exit lane when firing the last weapon in dense traffic, and pushed ordnance shops to recheck batteries, gyros, and handling steps on the electric torpedo. What the ledgers captured was not legend but effect. Along the Formosa Strait, the removal of tankers and loaded transports translated into fewer ready aircraft, slower repairs, and thin magazines at the wrong airfields as the Philippines fighting crested. The numbers were reconciled after the war, but their meaning was already written in 1944 convoys, forced into tight water, under too few capable escorts, will bleed when a trained crew, reliable sensors, and adequate torpedoes meet. Predictable routes. Memory kept the human texture. Survivor accounts and debriefs agree on the rhythm surface at night. Radar picture, parallel run short, spread, reload on the surface, go again, and on the final irony, the same invisible track that made those attacks possible could in a rare failure turn and erase the boat that fired it. The legacy inside the fleet was procedural humility rather than myth. Keep the doctrine. Reinforce the cautions. Do not spend the last torpedo without a path out. Do not mistake a month of perfect runs for immunity from a single defective arc. No single loss reversed the larger attrition pounding Japanese shipping in 1944, and no single boat decided a campaign. But one boat could make a week hurt and weeks compounded into shortages that starved operations downstream. That is what a choke point does when doctrine, logistics, and production are aligned and pressed without let-up. And the part the enemy could not quite believe was this: most of those blows fell in barely 9 months.